So one new thing that I did for this mix, I'm going to look at the guitar solo. And so the guitar solo is on the end of the song. It sounds like this when I got it. And just in context with everything else, this is the track. It's quite a brittle sound. The client was a big fan of Oasis, and this song is in the kind of similar style to Oasis, kind of big anthemic indie rock. One new technique that I used on this mix for this guitar solo was basically combining a room reverb, a tremolo with a slapback delay, and then sending the sound to a hard panned amp with spring reverb. I wanted to differentiate that and help that cut through, and so the EQ curve, if you look at it, I've actually scooped off the high end, some of the high end frequencies, and that's providing space for the other guitars to have the high end and this lead guitar to just tuck in below them and actually feel a bit warmer. But the technique that I'd like to show you is where I use the room reverb directly on the channel as an insert effect rather than using the same reverb I've got for the other guitars and the other instruments. And that allows this solo to live in its own space rather than being in amongst the other guitars. Again, separation and feeling like this is a new sound in the track that you haven't had before. It's almost like another character in the story of the song with its own sounds. So the room reverb I use is this one by Analog Obsession, which I like because it just feels like a really old, nice, classic room reverb, and it's called Room 041. I've got it fully wet, almost fully wet, and that's with it. If I take it off, it's a little bit more sustain on the notes, a bit more dimension to the sound, and it sort of gives it its own character, its own space. And I coupled that with the tremolo. And the tremolo is a great effect for actually helping a sound jump out of a mix. This is the first time I've really combined it with a room reverb like this after, because I would normally send a sound that's got tremolo into a reverb, whereas this time I've got the actual room reverb plugin, then the tremolo. So the tremolo is affecting the entire signal. This is and in the track, the tremolo is just giving it movement, a bit more texture, and it's helping it stick out of the mix. And movement's really good. I love that in solos. It adds a little bit more vibe. And then I mentioned the EQ, so I've run that EQ, scooping off the highs and boosting the mids. But then finally, I've actually combined it with an inline delay, and that's from Valhalla. And this is doing a kind of slapback effect. If I exaggerate it, you'll hear. It's set to being like an old, you've got an age knob here that makes the reverb sound old. It's a bucket brigade, so it's got a little bit more of an old school analog chip delay style. It's set to a mix of around 35%. And here we go. The final thing I did was this Valhalla delay, and that's just doing a very subtle slapback delay, a little bit like the 50s kind of sound. It's not very much feedback. It's just adding a little bit more movement, and I've made it a bit more of a crusty signal. So those three effects combined, without them, it's this. The room reverb, the tremolo, and delay. Loads more vibe, more character, a bit more vintagey, and then in the mix, those things will help it to live differently to those other guitars. And finally, I've actually panned this guitar just a little bit off to the left, and then I've sent it to a guitar amp with spring reverb on it. And that adds this extra sense of space. It's one of Logic's guitar amps. I've rolled off the high end, and I've got the reverb up almost maximum. And in the track, it sounds like this. So the spring reverb amp is panned all the way to the right. So you've got the main guitar in the middle, but then you get this extra reverb in the right-hand side, just in the right channel, and it kind of adds a sense of space. It's got separation, it's got more character, it's got space. Nothing else in the track before the solo has had these sounds. It's important for a solo element to feel like it's doing its thing in its own space and not going to get too blurred in with everything else. That's the new technique I've used. I'm really happy with it. I hope you like it. And the client was very happy with the mix, and the solo just really sounds way more interesting and way more bold and characterful than it did before. Cool, hope that helps.